Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started with our community development meeting. Today's date is May 8, 2025. The time is 10:01 a.m. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. In attendance are Commissioners Duncan and Matari. There's no opening remarks. Are there any changes to the agenda? Hearing none. Poll for conflicts of interest. There's none. So we'll move right into our public hearing, which is ORA 25-0001. And this is cargo containers and personal storage buildings. It's an action item, and we'll start off with Director Dave Callahan.
Good morning. Thank you, Commissioners. The item before you seeks to streamline the Land Use and Development Code so that a process that is currently a special notice review, which you might not know is an administrative review by my staff, and that ends with me signing off on these things, taking it away from that process into one that's just a by right use. So as long as people meet the conditions you saw embedded in the ordinance, they just go do it. That saves a couple of things. 3 months of processing time and $2,000+ on the applicant's side. And I think it also has the benefit of being predictable for people up front. You know, when they call in and ask us, how do I do a cargo container on our property? We say, if you do these things, you're done. And then they know. So our view of this is it's really straightforward, helpful, reduces costs, reduces staff time. And the Planning Commission agreed at their April 17th public hearing. They recommended to you unanimously to approve this. So you have a recommendation from staff and the Planning Commission for approval. We could go into the details if you have any questions, because we have access to everything in your electronic packet on the screen. But also, I should mention before I stop, that we did do the required analysis for how this compares to the comprehensive plan. It's the last couple of pages in the letter to the Planning Commission. So I believe everything's properly before you for your consideration.
Thank you. Any questions?
Just on how did we arrive at one? Like, why aren't you allowed to have two? What aren't you allowed to have 10? Why the?
Oh. Yeah, that dates back to before my time. The cargo containers have been embedded in the code, I don't even know how long. So I think we were really just rolling forward a concept that was special notice. We didn't actually think about allowing multiple units. Would you like us to look into that?
Well, I would assume it's going to cause a new public hearing if you change that number.
Well, what percentage of people are we talking about who put two versus one? Because, I mean, really, the idea of streamlining one, it makes it easy for the average person. But if you want to start adding multiple units onto your property, I think
is arguably greater.
It is. And I would argue that you'd want to at least ensure that, we're not stacking them and all those things.
Yeah, and it is the, greater than 5 acres, you can have more than one.
Right.
But it just was a constituent that came up to me and asked me why, that seems arbitrary to pick a number.
Well, I'll be so bold as to say I think one came about because anything more than that is kind of in your face, if you'll pardon the expression.
So can people have more than one? They would just have to apply for a permit?
Yes, that's my understanding.
I mean, we can always monitor this. I mean,
yeah, that's true.
It's not meant to.
Over time, we can certainly see how this goes. Circle back around if there's issues.
Yeah, I would just like to keep that in mind.
Okay.
We were the victim of the special notice permit a couple decades ago, and yeah, it was very frustrating because after we got done, then they said, "Oh, and now you have a setting fee," and my husband said, "Oh no, we don't. We're done. We just paid you $1,000 county for nothing because we're not going to pay you more money, so I can now set my cargo container on the ground." It should have been part of it. So obviously that way predated you. But yeah, so I'm very happy to see this come forward. It just was one of those things where it's like,
Sure.
why only one?
Well, do a little research on that. The blunt answer is I don't really know. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, it's a good point. I think, though, that the average person wants one, so we're getting rid of the red tape for that. But if you want more, then that's,
Right.
we'll just look at it. And
Sure.
if we got a whole bunch of people who are asking for two and it's not a big deal, then we can change it to two.
Yes, and I think the other thing about today's hearing is this is one of those rare occurrences where no one showed up at the Plan Commission, no one's contacted us. This seems to be one that everyone's
Well,
reasonably comfortable with.
Hold on, we
So
still
far.
have to ask for
So
comment,
far.
okay? All right, so it's not over yet.
True.
Any other questions? No? Well, with that said, would like to ask if anyone would like to speak for this revised ordinance or new ordinance. Anyone online? Anyone on Zoom? Anyone on the phone who would like to speak for this? Going once? Going twice? Would anyone like to speak against this? Anybody online, on the telephone? Hearing nothing, I would take a motion to end testimony and enter into deliberations.
I move that we end public testimony and enter into deliberations.
A second?
Commissioner Duncan,
Aye.
Chair Matari,
Aye? Okay.
I'm definitely in favor of it. I think it's about time, and my husband did mention, you've been here 6-something years, and now this comes up. Why wasn't it year one? And I'm like, I was busy, and I'm very happy to have this, but again, I do want to keep in mind about the number and to figure it out going forward. So, yeah, I'd like to get this done today, just so people have that option, and then if people need more, then we can view that later.
Yeah, so it makes it a lot easier for folks just to get something on their property where they can store items. And there's at least an expectation of what to do, how to do it, so that we can agree that it doesn't become an eyesore or, placed in the wrong area that affects other people. So I'll take a motion.
I move that we approve ORA 25-0001, cargo containers and personal storage buildings.
A second?
Commissioner Duncan,
Aye.
Chair Matari,
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners.
All right, on to deliberations. Item number 2. This is VAR 24-0012. It's Skeels, DeVries residence. It's an action item, and we have Vlad Finkel, who will be giving us a presentation.
Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, Vlad Finkel with Kootenai County Community Development. This is a request for a variance to the front and rear yard setbacks in the commercial zone. The subject property is located at the intersection of Cape Horn Road and Horseshoe Lane in Bayview. This is somewhat of a unique parcel because it's bisected by a road as well as it's very narrow, and the shape of the road itself creates quite a bit of space that's very unusable based on the prescribed setbacks in the commercial zone, and I'll get into the details of that later on in my presentation. This property is zoned commercial and surrounded by restricted residential parcels on 3 sides. I do not have information as to why this parcel is zoned commercial and when it was rezoned that. This is not the essence of the request, but just more or less just historical information or overview of the zoning in the area. As you can see, the setbacks in the commercial zone are slightly different than those of the restricted residential zone. Primarily, the front yard setback is additional 10 feet and makes it 35 feet, and the rear yard setback is 20 feet, which is, I believe, slightly less than the restricted residential zone. I'm not able to use the. I'm unable to move the slide. Would you be able to just focus it?
Oh, there you go.
So here are the photos of the property. It's currently vacant. There is a portable teepee on it, but it's primarily just a grassy area that the applicants have used over the course of many years, as long as they own the property. This is the proposed site plan. As you can see, Horseshoe Lane has this awkward shape, and it traverses through the property. This is the right-of-way itself, but the actual road is further west. I do not have a good recollection why those, the right-of-way and the physical road do not align. In 1978, based on a court order, the judge deemed this road as a public road for the benefit of the general public to access the lake, and it should remain unobstructed. The applicants are requesting a variance of 25 feet from the right-of-way of Horseshoe Lane so that their residence is 10 feet from the right-of-way. It will actually be quite a bit farther away from the road itself. They're also seeking a variance to their rear yard setback of 10 feet so that the rear of the residence would be 10 feet from the eastern property line. Now, you may ask, why is it that the department determined this to be the front yard and not the property line that abuts Cape Horn Road? Well, the code states basically that the point of access where it intersects the property line is where it's considered to be the front. And that's how the department has always interpreted the orientations of all setbacks in various zones. As you can see, the residence will be located, pretty much in the center of the area that is feasible for development. Otherwise, they would not be able to build a house simply because this is the rendering of the house, but the property itself is very narrow. It's approximately 46 feet wide. And so this makes it a good textbook case for approval of a variance simply because if you were to account for the front and the rear yard setbacks of 35 feet and 20 feet, that would make it 55 feet. And the property is only 46 feet wide. So essentially the overlap of the prescribed setbacks in the commercial zone would make it ineligible for any building permits. During the agency comment period, we solicited comments. Everyone was on board. We really had no concerns. The highway district was not opposed to the location of the access point as well as the location of the residence. They did state that they would not grant access directly off of Cape Horn Road simply because it would be too close to the Horseshoe Lane right-of-way. And because of the site distance concerns, it's not something that is appropriate to have a separate access to the site. So during the public comment period, we received a total of 8 comments in support, 1 in opposition, and 1 neutral. The 1 comment in opposition, it was hard to decipher what their point was because they simply said, if I recall, that they bought what they bought and they should have what they have. Well, if that's the case, really this property would not be eligible for any development permits. We find that the irregular shape of the property and the unusual circumstances of where the access has to be gained, the fact that the property is bisected by a right-of-way, and the setbacks actually being greater than the width of the property make it an undue hardship. And this is something that's not self-imposed by the applicant, and therefore we recommended approval of this request. At the hearing, which was held on April 17th, there were a few people that showed up who reside in the area, and all of them were in support of the applicant's request. Subsequently, following the HE hearing, the recommendation came in support of this application. And I stand for any questions that you have for me at this time.
Any questions? No? I'm kind of curious, why do we have setbacks to begin with for residential properties?
The purpose of setbacks is to primarily have, is to establish not a buffer as well as have the aesthetics of having residences set apart. And I think one of the major factors is for health and safety reasons. If you have, in case of a fire, you have the necessary distance between the structures to maintain, the risk of a fire not actually transferring over from one structure to another. So it's for good planning, for separation as well as aesthetics.
Yeah, and then if we have these unusual lots, if I take my 10 acres and I, somehow I'm able to subdivide it into these shapes and that would preclude proper setbacks for residential, is that really a hardship for the person who buys it? And we have this this code, if you will, that says that, hey, if you buy this piece of land, we have these setback requirements, right? So why is that a hardship for me if I buy a piece of land and I already know what the setbacks are and I decide to buy it anyhow?
Well, you raise a good question, Commissioner Matari, but I would like to point out what you stated. I want to maybe
Glad I can interject
it. Is that-
and get to the point quickly.
go ahead.
The answer to your question is it varies. If this had been done as you described, we would have said it was a self-imposed hardship. But this was done in the 70s or before we even had development code. So there cannot be a self-imposed hardship.
Well, is it the same property owner?
No, but they bought something that pre-existed code. So it was a lot that was created in a way that is so irregular, it can't actually meet code.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to make one correction, which I wanted to point out in the first place. The distinction is, Commissioner Matari, you were talking about platted lots that were created through a subdivision process. In this case, this is unplatted piece of parcel described as a tax number. So it did not go through a plat review, and staff did not have an opportunity to determine whether or not there's sufficient room to build. So currently, when we review subdivisions, we make it very clear to the applicants they cannot create lots that would be unreasonable for future utility and livability. And we would not grant approval. In fact, I'm processing one right now that has that similar issue. And we said this specific layout would require variances in the future. And the project is not moving forward. But this is clearly the subject side is described as tax number, and then it has the tax number associated with it.
Yeah, and I understand, and this is legacy. That goes back to Bayview. The what is it? Restricted residential, which is really kind of an oxymoron, if you will.
And this is commercial, which poses a different hardship because commercial setbacks are bigger than residential setbacks.
Well, even that, the land is zoned commercial, so you know what you're buying. There's no. I'm trying to figure out at what point, when you buy something, and I'm not saying I'm against this, but I'm just saying as an example, at what point when you buy a piece of property, and this is how it's defined, you know what you're buying, that the exception is really, it doesn't apply necessarily because you know what you bought, and you're asking us to make these variants with, in some cases, they can come across as arbitrary. And that's where I'm trying to understand it. For this one, I understand that it was a property that was platted first, and then some rights were
Wasn't
taken
platted.
away from it.
Well, at this point, we don't actually even know why it was zoned commercial.
Yeah,
We could do that research, but I don't know that we would find it because the record keeping of the county back then was so poor.
yeah,
And so here you have a conflation of things that conspire to create a problem that is unusual, if not unique.
yeah. And I get it. I understand, So I'm asking the questions because we should be able to always justify it if there's going to be an exception.
Play it out the reverse way for a moment. Suppose they actually wanted to do a commercial use, which is allowed by law. These zoning setbacks prohibit anything to be built. That, to me, is an undue hardship.
Yeah. No, it's an anomaly. It's an edge case largely. So, and I get that. I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
I move that we approve VAR 24-0012, Skeels and DeVries.
Second.
Commissioner Duncan,
Aye.
Chair Matari.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Next up is CUP 24-0013, and this is the Wood Family Cemetery. And we have Justice.
Good morning, Commissioners. Justice Mac George with Kootenai County Community Development for the record. Yeah, this is a proposal CUP for a private cemetery. So looking at the vicinity map, it's within the area near Rathdrum. To my knowledge, it's not within the Rathdrum area of city impact, on kind of the north skirt of the prairie. Looking a little bit closer in, you can see North Highway 53 toward the bottom right. Access is gained from North Highway 53 via an easement, and it traverses through the subject parcel. You can see the approximate area proposed for the burial sites in yellow on the southeast property line. And it's important to note for the property arrangement, the property actually is divided by a section line. So the south portion of the parcel, it is all one parcel, but the area where the burial site is proposed is actually zoned agricultural suburban, and the north portion is zoned rural. So there are two different zonings, which I believe there's a visual of that coming up. This is the photo taken from the east, looking west toward the burial site. So again, where the yellow easement line turns at a 90-degree angle, that's where the photo was taken from. And then you can actually see there's some white crosses kind of on the right side. That's actually an existing burial site for a private Catholic cemetery to the parcel to the east. This is in the area where the site is proposed, looking again from the west side looking east. And again, you can see actually the existing site there. Walking a little bit more to the east side, you can kind of see where the property line is based on where the trees are. And then this is the north side looking south toward the truck, and that's the south end. So it's about a 1/4 acre proposed for the burial site. This is the zoning map I was referring to earlier. So the north side is a rural zone, the south side is the agricultural suburban zone. So it's a split zone parcel by a section line. Now you may ask, why is a CUP required? It is specifically a requirement per the zoning that any cemetery requires the CUP process. There are no performance standards established in the code, and so we really depended on agencies to kind of guide us what would be required. This is the proposed site plan. Again, it shows what we saw earlier, the access from the Highway 53 area outlined in red is the area for the burial sites. And to my knowledge, they are proposing, I believe it was up to 20 burial sites over the next 30 years in terms of scale. Public agencies, PhD really had no comments. Idaho Department of Water Resources, they only really commented if there is irrigation in the future, there may need to be a water right. Other than that, we did solicit comment from the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare. They deferred us to the Kootenai County coroner. The coroner is not a regulating agency. However, they just recommended some best practices, which some have been included as recommendation or conditions of approval. ITD, Northern Lakes Fire District, Kootenai County Building Division didn't really pose any concerns. There were 3 public comments in total, 2 in support, 1 was neutral. And the community development does conclude that the applicant has met the required findings and supports the applicant's request. And likewise, the hearing examiner concluded the same. Here's the site plan again, and here are the required findings, and I stand for any questions.
Any questions?
It said on there that a CUP was required for rural zone, so is a CUP required for restricted residential as well? Just, I mean,
I don't
every
believe
zone?
it's required for the rural zone. It is required for the agricultural suburban zone, which is
Ag
the
suburban.
zoning for this property.
Okay,
Let's go
okay,
back to
because
that.
if, yeah, on the bottom requires CUP for cemeteries in the rural zone. So that's why I was.
That would be a typo,
Oh.
but I will
Okay.
confirm. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah. That's all I have.
Could you just go back to the map and show us where in relation the proposed site is to the existing cemetery?
Yes. So this is actually the site plan, and the applicant actually pointed out this is the area of the existing Skeels
Okay, all
cemetery. Yeah.
Okay. The only question I would have on this, and I don't really see an issue with it, is where does this location fit in the bigger scheme of things? And, are there plans to develop? Are there, roads planned to be built, things like that?
Yeah, it's not within the city of Rathdrum area of city impact, for one. I would maybe defer back to the comprehensive plan. So the designation is country, and the primary purpose of this designation is to protect open space, promoting agricultural activities, residential subdivisions. The secondary purpose is to promote economic activities that minimize environmental impacts and do not require a full range of services.
Yeah.
This would certainly fall under that category.
I only ask because if you go back 30 or 40 years, there's land that's been fully developed now that, was in this exact same state. And, so how does that play into the future growth?
Certainly, yeah, you raise an excellent question. Overall, a lot of these parcels are owned by the same family. I believe these three, as well as this one to the south. And I don't know if they will plan on conveying in the future, but it's always a possibility.
It'll probably limit the desirability unless, there's something that conveys with the property to make it permanent.
Commissioners, since it's unlikely the cities will reach this area in my lifetime, I think you're looking at probably county residential development. And you should know, the original parks in this country and in Europe were cemeteries. And that's what actually started the park movement in the United States, was people were accustomed to using cemeteries as their parkland, and then parks developed off of that. So I share that with you for the simple notion that residential development for hundreds of years has been seen as compatible use next to cemeteries. You have seen that in the city of Coeur d'Alene off of Government Way, for example.
So we're witnessing the beginning, perhaps, of a park.
Well,
Or
I
a
think you're
park-like-
witnessing another development of use that will be compatible with a cemetery.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, the most thing you will see here in the unincorporated county are more homes. Otherwise, it's just agriculture.
It is interesting how that came about.
Why, yes.
I don't have any other questions.
Oh, I move that we approve CP 24-0013 Wood Family Cemetery.
Second.
Commissioner Duncan,
Aye.
Chair Matari.
Aye. Motion carries. Next up is business item number 4, Bulletin 77 Amendment Approval. It's an action item, and we have Director David Callahan.
Commissioners, by way of quick background, Bulletin 77 is one of 3 policies I've written in the 11 years I've been here. The policies that the department uses date back to the 90s, early 90s. We've had, frankly, relatively few of them over the years. And the purpose of these kinds of bulletins, in this case, bulletins are for building code issues, is to explain what would otherwise be confusing because it's not captured by the building code. So this particular bulletin dates back originally to 2017. Craig's got it on the screen. Craig, if you'll stroll down to the bottom, the next page right there, at that time we came up with 3 ways where you could meet the Bulletin 77 idea, which I should back up and say the whole concept here was to make it clear that a person could have a mother-in-law's quarters under the same roof as their main home. The building code's not abundantly clear, wasn't then, and not now, as clear as we'd like it. And one of the things over the last 8 years we've discovered is that people were working the angles, if you will, where they would meet one of these 3 things, but then lease out what became an apartment as a Airbnb. That's problematic if it's over the aquifer, for instance, where we're supposed to have 1 dwelling unit for 5 acres. So that's one explanation. We've had few others like that, where the current Bulletin 77 just hasn't fully captured the need. So the new 77, we kept it at 77, even though I could have called it 78. Just because people have become accustomed to it, they like the ability to have a mother-in-law's quarters underneath the same roof. So what we've tried to do is just streamline it, get rid of the 3 things you saw on the screen, make it clear in the new text that it can't be a rental unit. And otherwise, we think it's simpler to understand, easier to enforce. And I hope you agree.
I guess, so you're tightening up the language so people don't take advantage of it. We're facing a housing crisis, and how does this hurt that part of it? Like, Kiki's has her
Right.
group, and they're trying to do home shares.
Part of that.
Yeah, so how does this affect home shares?
Well,
Don't think it does, because the concept of home share is actually at the moment is done in the cities, not the county.
Right.
But you could do a home share under,
But they couldn't have a separate kitchen.
yeah, but you're
you
saying,
could with this.
Okay.
but what you're saying is that over the aquifer, that's a problem. And that's the prevailing,
Well, taking it to its extreme, it is if it's an Airbnb, because you basically have 2 dwelling units over the aquifer. If you have 1 single-family home with someone living in a bedroom, arguably that has no more impact than a single-family home. That's the whole concept behind Bulletin 77. So I'm thinking it doesn't conflict at all with the family home share or anything like
Well,
trying to create additional housing in the unincorporated county.
the way I understand it is that the intention of this was so that you could have a relative live with you and have their own personal living space.
Yes.
Okay. The affordable housing issue is not about having a relative. It's about being able to rent something to someone who wants to live here, which is non-family related. That's a different intent.
It's a different beast. And arguably, I guess that part of it be prohibited because it's a rental. And this is saying you can't rent. But
But you could rent it if you moved out of it. You
Sorry.
could rent it if you moved out of it.
A, B, I'm thinking through how else that might work. Well, again, as long as it's meets the definition of family, which you wouldn't necessarily know, our code and the federal law basically says they're unrelated people up to 8 living together as a family unit. So again, I think it's conceivable you could have a person living in this space
That's not family.
that's not family. They
Okay.
just arguably aren't supposed to be renting it here. But that's also in line with what Kiki's idea is, as I understand it, where people are sharing their home with people, not necessarily getting rent for it.
Yeah. I don't mind approving this today, but I reserve my right to bring it back up again and
Sure.
look at it.
We think this is better than what we have,
Right.
but I'm always open to improvements.
Yeah. Okay.
That's fine.
So with your consent, we'll ask you to sign it and it'll become the new 77.
Okay.
Okay, thank
So
you.
Do you want a motion for that?
I think we need one.
That'd be nice.
Sure. So I move that we approve Bulletin 77 as amended.
Second.
Commissioner Duncan?
Aye.
Chair Matari?
Aye. Motion carries. Next up, number 5, parcel conveyance recommendations, tax deed sales, and again, Director David Callahan.
Commissioners, all of these are pretty straightforward. If you've read through the staff briefing, you may not have any questions. In each case, we think these remnants need to go in one case either to the HOA, in one case to the school district, in another case to adjoining property owner, just because they're all so small. It'd be nonsensical. You can see on the screen there, it's one example. That's the one that's the HOA, as I recall, where each one of those parcels was a remnant that should have been transferred through the subdivision plat, but wasn't, arguably because of bad platting. It's a city subdivision, not something we do, but the county ends up with it when these remnants are left over. So that's a case where we think it ought to go to the HOA.
Do we have, on these 3 particular things, do we have current offers? Or
Craig,
where?
do you know?
No?
No, not at this
Okay,
time.
Okay.
okay. But the work is done in case we get an offer,
In case you
or,
get one.
or now we can send out letters to the adjoining and say,
Would you be
please.
interested?
Yeah. Oh,
Yes.
perfect. No, I thought they were fine. I thought they were all reasonable.
Okay.
So that's where we are. Are you okay with that?
Yeah. Do we need a motion?
No, I don't think
Because
so. I think,
okay.
like you said, if we get offers, now you got background and you know
Yeah.
what to do.
And hopefully the people who are adjoining
Yes,
accept this.
that would be nice. You would think the school district would be all over it, since
Yeah.
my understanding is they actually have playground equipment in the area.
And we should be
Already.
working on a white paper as a case study for what happens when you don't go after these properties.
Yeah, speaking of, I sent you a voicemail.
For Willoughby?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. They were doing one thing on their list, and I don't think they handled it well, so. Craig can. Good, yeah, listen to your voicemail first, so you know.
All right. Well, I think that concludes everything. So 10:39, meeting adjourned.
thank you, commissioners.